A snoot can prevent the light from spraying where you don't want it to be.
I didn't care for the way the light was hitting the bricks. It's certainly not bad, but rather than spraying all over, I thought it might be better to highlight him rather than the bricks.
So I put the snoot on the flash, and that concentrated the light just on him. I prefer the rogue grid over a snoot because it has a more circular beam pattern. It comes with 3 options for beam width by using one or both grids.
The holder it comes with is okay, but it's a bit sloppy. You can easily do this to make it more solid. Or build something like this very simple bracket, which is easy to attach. In this batch of images, I've compared using the zoom on the flash head at 2 zoom head positions, to the snoot with 2 zoom head positions, and to the grid with 2 zoom head positions, along with the 2 grid options. As you can see, the grid is better at forming a circular pattern with a rapid fall-off. There's a big difference in size of beam width between the tightest flash head zoom setting and the widest grid spot. This housing that came with the rogue grid spot to hold the grids can be used when you want that in-between size beam width. This is where the flash and then the grid were positioned for the next images. This was done with a speedlight with the head zoomed to 105 millimeters on a boom arm over the subject for butterfly lighting. This was done with the same setup, but this time I added a rogue grid spot. I think it creates more drama in the lighting. When we use grids, we need to be careful of 2 aspects: aiming it and exposing it. Here I think I missed on both. I got the aim right here, but the exposure is a bit stark and too unnatural, not the look I wanted. I like this exposure better because it keeps the spotlit feeling, but without the overly dramatic contrast. And in case you're wondering what it looks like without the flash, it's clear that this is not acceptable. This will be the location for the next series of images. I cropped into an image to show the lighting. Catch lights in the eyes show the lighting and the modifiers that I used. This was the image with my usual lighting controls in place: a blocker above her and a reflector below. All the lighting was the same here except that I added a spot flash. It flattens the light at these levels, but I like the result.
You'll have to excuse my voice. I had some neck surgery, so the next few slides will sound a little funny. Anyway, so which is better, to spotlight an area or light it flatly, then vignette it in editing software? This is an average scene that's lit flatly. Now I vignetted that scene in Photoshop with a typical vignette action. Same scene, but lit with a spot. The differences lie in the perimeters. Rather than lighting that stuff with flash and darkening it, the ambient light is all that reached that perimeter with the spotlight version.
Here are the 2 images so that you can compare those 2 because they're somewhat similar, but there are some differences, and this will allow you to see the differences. The differences in the previous examples were a little hard to see, so here's another example in flat outside light. The main differences here will be in the shadows cast by the spotlight in the outer two tomatoes. So how would this be of value in portraits? Well, frankly, not a lot, and only if shadows were cast by a broad light on things around the perimeter. I only wanted to point it out as an FYI. So there are subtle differences, but given a choice, I prefer the lighting vignette. That said, we usually apply a vignette in post-production simply because it's easier and more controllable. Be sure that when you buy a new lighting device, it offers some clear advantage to what you already have. I get a kick out of it when someone says they used a beauty dish or a parabolic umbrella or a Schmidl Fretz light splatterer or window light bounced off of a cookie sheet, as if there were something magical about that particular device, because in many cases it could have been any of a dozen other devices that would have produced similar light. It's better to study the physics of what it does than it is to ask photographers who haven't tested and compared all of the various tools. We all have biases that influence our opinions.
In order to be really soft light, it has to be large and close.
Let's just briefly step back to show and describe the difference in hard light versus soft light. A hard light is one that is small compared to the subject. See the hard shadow edges and the specularity or shine on her face? Soft light is a large light and close to the subject, so its apparent size is large compared to the subject. A soft light produces soft shadows. The next two images were done with the light in the same place. This was done with the bare speed light. Ain't no way you can sell this. Now this was done with the speed light in the same place, but a softbox in front of it. Much more sellable. And this is the post-treatment that I did for the client. I used NYX tonal contrast with a bit of desaturation, and I added the smudges on her cheeks with a Photoshop brush.
Let's compare an off-camera hard flash to the light quality that we get with a softbox. With hard flash, we get a hard neck shadow under the chin. With the 22-inch Larson softbox, it's a much more pleasing soft shadow. You can study the comparisons here. Hard flash causes specularity as well as harder shadow edges.
It was late in the evening and I felt it would be a good idea to add light to keep the background darker. I prefer soft light, so I fired the raw flash into a 42 by 72 scrim. Even though it was a very humid evening, she looks cool and dry. This is because the light is soft. What if we decided that the large light panel was too much effort? Then we get this. I only used a hard, small flash. The result was specular light, making her look sweaty. There's even a noticeable and helpful difference between a small softbox and a larger light source, this time provided by a scrim that's dropped in front of the softbox. This was done with my 24-inch softbox alone. It was a humid evening and her darker complexion will show shine more than a fair complexion will. Watch the shine on the face by her cheekbones. The shine is significantly less by dropping the scrim in the path. That service door window has a grill in it, and I decided to use that for an interesting pattern on the garage wall. Lighting that window with a softbox didn't do squat to show the grill. But switching to that speed light alone did. So this was a case where a small light was the answer for the background. I was careful though not to let her face get lit by that hard light. She was lit by the soft light of the open garage door.
This is what most speedlight flash holders look like. They hold the flash by its foot. The problem with that is that it's very likely to be damaged as soon as the light stand tips over. This would be the preferred method to mount a speedlight to a softbox. And when, not if, the softbox tips over backwards, you'll need a U-bar to protect it from harming the flash. It also makes a great carrying handle.
If you don't have the option I just showed, here's another way to accomplish that. You can build the head holder right on the back plate as I did with this Larson softbox. I actually came up with this concept of holding the flash by its head rather than its foot long before Godox did. I should have patented it. Here are the dimensions on that bracket. You'll notice that the bolts are kind of long. I'll show you why. They're long so that you can mount 2 flashes for more power. This is sometimes needed if you use speedlights, like for family portraits when the flash needs to be farther away. We want the front surface to be lit as evenly as possible. One way to get the light its softest is to use the internal baffle that most softboxes have. Let's step through the progression of how and how not to set up a softbox with a speedlight. This was done with the Larson softbox, which isn't made anymore, but the principles are universal. With the zoom head set to cover 105 millimeters, you can see that the size of the light is too small.
So let's add the internal material baffle to spread out the light. It helps, but there's still a hot spot. Such a bright center reduces its softness and adds specularity. So if we zoom as wide as we can on this Canon flash and use the baffle, it evens out the light more, so there's no center hotspot. When using such a small softbox, we want the light to be as broad as possible. By the way, the 14mm diffuser will spread the light more, but at the cost of a lot of light loss. I'll show what effect the light has using this ball that has a shape and surface reflectance somewhat like a person's face. With the softbox flash at 105mm, you can see a pronounced specular highlight, and the diffused light has a rather sharp drop-off into shadow.
With the flash at its widest zoom setting and using the internal baffle, the light is now more spread out, both in the specular and on the overall ball. These days I use a twist-open softbox that was originally designed by Lastolite, and now there are clones made by various Chinese brands. They're lightweight, very fast to set up, and the twist-open design avoids damaging anything it comes in contact with. In addition, that springy construction will cushion it when it falls. So that's why I prefer this over umbrella-type softbox designs. There are some softboxes that have a deeper design. Let's look at why that's helpful. Looking at the shape of these softboxes, I would prefer the deeper design than a shallower one because it's easier to get the light to evenly illuminate the front surface of that softbox. This is the reason why a deep design softbox works better. With a shallow softbox, the light has to travel proportionately farther than in a deep design. In addition, speedlight lenses concentrate more light in the center of its beam. With this wide softbox, you can see here that there's very little reflection off the inner walls. With a relatively deeper, flat-sided softbox, light can reflect off the inner walls of that softbox. But more importantly, its light is very even, without requiring an internal baffle. With my Canon 600 flash at 20mm, the light is smooth with only a slight hot spot in the center.
The flash's 14mm diffuser helps to illuminate the entire front panel more evenly from end to end. But the cost of using the 14mm diffuser is that it sucks about a stop and 2/3 of light. That means shorter flash range and reduced battery life.
This is an umbrella type, and in this wide, shallow type of softbox, a speedlight without any inner deflector won't spread its light wide enough to take advantage of the softbox's size. This type of softbox needs a bare bulb, so its light can reflect off the walls of the softbox.